book talk with a lamp lighting ceremony. I now invite Alo to light a lamp. And now invite Dr. Meenakshi Jain to light a lamp. And now invite Nandini to light a lamp. I now invite Lipika to light a lamp. Partho will now give you the inaugural address.
Distinguished speakers of the 2023 Pondy Lit Fest Book Talks, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all to the Pondy Lit Fest Book Talks, an exceptional day of lectures and conversations on books written by some of the very best intellectuals of India. The Pondy Lit Fest is a platform of ideas that equip us to engage intimately and intelligently with our past so that we may adopt an informed roadmap for our future. As Sri Aurobindo mentioned in a speech shortly after the Surat Congress in 1908, whoever wishes to cut off the nation from its past is no friend of our national growth. Whoever fails to take advantage of the present is losing us the battle of life. We must therefore save for India all that she has stored up of knowledge, character, and noble thought in her immemorial past. We must acquire for her the best knowledge Europe can give her and assimilate it to our own peculiar type of national temperament. We must introduce the best methods of teaching humanity has developed, whether modern or ancient. If this be our goal, then what better means to achieve it than educating ourselves from the books of some of the very best minds of India today. Today, Indic thought must continue to debunk myths and malicious lies and distortions about our past that make us think less of ourselves, but also ensure that we look ahead with a vision and formulate solutions that are suited to the Indian ethos and spiritual goal. The author lineup of our program today delivers exactly that. The task before is hard, the path long and uncharted, but what better light to guide us than knowledge? By the time this day is done, we would have armed ourselves with grace and knowledge of Ma Saraswati. Knowledge, after all, has been the mainstay of Bharata Shakti for the land we call our mother. Thank you. Jai Hind.
We now invite Parthoda of Blue One Ink to say a few words about the philosophy of their work and its mission.
Good morning to everyone. Just a few words about Blue One Ink. We are relatively new in the publishing world. Though we are growing at a fairly good pace, not a gallop yet, but a trot. But we are happy to be doing what we are doing. The story of Blue One Ink actually began many years ago in Auroville. I was at a retreat, at a small workshop retreat on the theme of nationalism and internationalism in Sri Aurobindo's light. And there was a group of young Indians, some older philosophers, thinkers, and a very interesting and at that time very challenging question came up, that why the association of Indian nationalism with the Sanatan Dharma. This was a reference to a quote, a few lines from Sri Aurobindo's very famous Uttarpara speech. I may not recall the exact words, but what Sri Aurobindo said was this Hindu nation was born of Sanatan Dharma. And with Sanatan Dharma it moves, and with Sanatan Dharma it grows. If the Sanatan Dharma were to decline, the nation would decline. And if the Sanatan Dharma were capable of perishing, the nation would perish. Categorical words that unambiguously associate the Hindu nation, Hindu Rashtra, Hindu Dharma, and Sanatan Dharma. And it struck me at that moment when I heard this question, that this was very similar to a question I had in college. And I happened to be a student of one of so-called leading colleges in the country. And I didn't know the answer. And there were these very young people, also representatives of some of the best educational institutions in our country, and they did not know the answer. I discovered in the next couple of hours that I discussed this subject with them that we had no idea of Hindu nationalism, we had no idea of Hindu Dharma, we had no idea of Sanatan Dharma. Whatever our ideas were quite frankly imported from the West. We were still mentally colonized. And it suddenly struck me that we have grown up with a narrative that was not ours, and we were never taught to question the narrative. It was then that the idea of Blue One Ink grew, that we need a platform that will unashamedly, unambiguously, openly, frankly, honestly bring back the Sanatan values, the Sanatan culture, the Sanatan vision and philosophy to nation building, to the idea of the nation. We needed a platform that would bring together thinkers, scholars, writers, philosophers, darshanics of the traditional kind, together to speak in one voice. Of course, diversity, but to speak in one voice that we need our own narrative. It's high time. And this is not a narrative against another narrative. We are not interested in fighting battles. We just need our own space. We need our own narrative. We need a culture, a civilization, a civilizational culture where our young can grow up feeling good and feeling proud to be Indian, to be Hindu. So this is the vision and the idea of Blue One Ink. We are still very small. We are fighting in a space where there are very big names, a lot of money involved. But we have hope, we have faith, and our inspiration is Sri Aurobindo himself, and with his inspiration, we don't have doubts. And the time has come for this to happen. I was just standing in the back, and Partha was telling me, he was pointing out to some of the young writers, some of the very well-known names in this space who will be talking about the books today, and he was telling me these are the stalwarts today in the country. You know, they have fan followings. There are young people who go and attend their talks, and I remember even Deepak said the same. It was just one after the other, and it really made me happy, because this is how a narrative change happens. This is how we begin to speak the language, the words that we need to speak. So Blue One Ink is that platform we want to create, and I'm happy and privileged to be speaking about Blue One Ink in the presence of some of the leading writers and thinkers in the space today. And all I have to say is be with us as we are with you, and let's see where all this leads us. Thank you so much.
Vanakkam Suprabhatam. Welcome to the PLF Book Talks 2023. In our opening session, we have Professor Anand Ranganathan, scientist and author, in conversation with Dr. Vikram Sampath, historian and author, on taking narratives forward, fiction versus non-fiction.
Good morning, everyone. Absolutely wonderful to come back, keep coming back to Pondicherry. It's like a family. You have your younger sister, Gloria, elder sister, Alo. Don't mind that, Alo. That was paid for, that comment was paid for by Gloria. No, but absolutely wonderful to see, especially on a Sunday morning, such a wonderful audience, and I hope we can do justice to the topic that we've been given. And of course, with my great friend Vikram, who, by the way, in the last, I was calculating, in the last 2 months, he's traveled to 24 cities. This is the 25th city. So this is a real Bharat Jodo Yatra. The other one was Bharat Todo Yatra, this one is. And you can see the resemblance to the youth icon. No, but Vikram, let me start off straight away with setting up of narratives, because I think that's one theme that is very dear to seems very pertinent to a lot of people. But before we talk of setting of narratives, we have to talk of the kind of narratives that were thrust upon us over the last 70 years. Now, do you think India has been an exception in the setting up of narratives, fiction or non-fiction, and then we'll come slowly and kind of disentangle fiction from non-fiction? But a lot of nations who've gained independence, and India being one, if we chart our journey in the last 70 years, do you think there has been a deliberate attempt to set a particular narrative or just let things be? I think that's a question that needs answering before we delve more into that.
Right. Very good morning, everyone. And I've really broken the jinx with Pondy Lit Fest. This is third time lucky. And every time, somehow, just before the Pondy Lit Fest, I would either fall sick or there would be some emergency in the family. And so this time I ensured that come what may, even if it had to be on a stretcher, I would come here and actually speak at the Lit Fest. I'm glad I'm at least not in that condition. Anand actually has conned me into this session. This is supposed to be an individual session of every person who needs to talk about their books, and Anand, who's in addition to the many, many hats that he wears, other than, of course, beaming into our drawing rooms every night, demolishing narratives in his own way by asking for those extra 30 seconds, which goes on and on for several minutes, much to the dismay and also amazement of the poor, hapless anchor, was supposed to do this single-handedly because he's also a novelist. I don't know how he manages in just 24 hours in a day. He has some wonderful research papers in science which he publishes. He's any topic, whether it's politics, economics, he's there with an answer each night. But in addition, he's also written these lovely, novels, including a latest mystery thriller, Souffle, which I would strongly recommend all of you must read. And ideally, this should have been a session where he's talking about his book. So why I said I've been conned into it is he's made this into a conversation so that he doesn't have to talk much about his book, and rather all of you should buy and read it. So I see the very hideous kind of agenda that a Punjabi who tries to masquerade as a Tamilian in Tamil land, claiming the sweet from my part of the country, which is Mysore Pak, I'm sorry, but tries to do. But Anand, to your question, I think that's, and particularly in the discipline that I write on, which is history, there has been, of course, an attempt to hegemonize and also impose a kind of narrative. History as a discipline, I've always stated, is something which thrives on multiplicity of views. There has to be multiple viewpoints, differences of opinion, a healthy discussion, debates, dissent, and so on. But and the sad part was, even under colonial rule in British India, when someone like Mill wrote his History of British India, where he rubbished every aspect of Indian history, Indian culture, and so on. Even at the heights of colonial rule, we had, particularly from Maharashtra, a lot of historians who wrote anonymously, because they were under British rule. You couldn't openly bring out rebuttals, but the first Hindu, Hindoo, the second Hindu, the third Hindu. So these rebuttals kept getting published in various publications. That in a way gave rise to what is known as the nationalist school of historiography in India. I really don't know whether there's a right, left. This is a very false divide in a country like India. I would rather say it's a nationalist and an anti-national narrative. So the nationalist historiography that came around at that time, as I said, starting with a lot of people from Maharashtra, V.K. Rajwade, Bhandarkar, and others, it thrived and then grew, and Bengal, of course, being the intellectual hub, also caught on to it. So ideally, and that's the saddest part, that after independence, this this entire school, the manner in which it was ruthlessly suppressed, only to ensure there was a certain political narrative which had to be furthered, and the historian actually became a chef, where the ruler actually says, you know, I want a dish to be prepared this way with so much of salt and so much of whatever, and that is how the historian ultimately started cooking and cutting to size what the ruler asked him or her to do. And we all know that famous episode, even someone as celebrated as Dr. R.C. Majumdar, who was at the head of an entire committee to write about the history of the freedom movement, appointed by Jawaharlal Nehru's government, made it amply clear that this is not going to be court history. And he's going to dispassionately analyze every aspect of the freedom movement, including the strong reservations he had about Gandhi and his role in the freedom movement itself, for which he was summarily, deposed from the committee. And someone who had very little to do with modern Indian history. I think he was an IAFS officer dealing with Iranian, art and all of that. This person was actually made in charge of the official government project of what the history of, the freedom struggle was supposed to be. So this kind of subtly gave also a clue to all other existing historians that if you have to survive in this ecosystem, if you have to actually, be accepted, then you will have to toe that line. And so, anybody who went against the grain, including R.C. Majumdar or Sitaram Goyal, Ram Swaroop, Dharampal, so many others, I mean, the kind of price that they had to pay, with their careers being at stake, fellowships, being denied to them, and literally nobody reading them. We did not even have a blue ink then which could publish them and bring these narratives out. So I think in this war of narratives, it has been a constant struggle for the nationalist school of historiography to emerge and make its point. But I think, Anand, it's the same when it comes to the world of fiction as well, isn't it? Because all the kind of stories in the last several decades which actually win any kind of acclaim abroad are the ones which disparage India. Whether it's even novels, whether it's even films which win, all kinds of international awards, are the ones which actually show India in a very poor light. Slumdog Millionaire, I mean, not any other thing. So, what is your take as a novelist? That how has fiction kind of been monopolized by a particular tone and tenor of a narrative which has been set, and who has set that?
Yeah. So. First of all, let me clarify that, yes, you're absolutely right that each of the authors is supposed to take time to talk about his or her book, but I'm absolutely petrified, especially if the book that I have written is a thriller, to talk about it, because lest it, I may give away not just the plot, but, a few things. And there's a wonderful short story, I can't remember who's written it. It's called The Last Page. And it is, so the story begins by a guy who rings a bell of a house, and someone opens it and says, did you, take this book from the library? And the lady said, yes. He says, who was the killer? The last page was torn. So, like that, I don't want to give the plot away. And it's, if you, for example, write, let's say, fiction which is, and here is where I think we can come to the topic, fiction which is very finely intertwined or entangled with non-fiction, which is the kind of genre you can say that Naipaul kind of really pioneered. Then it is easy to talk about the thing, but if it's a simple murder mystery that is contemporary, that's got nothing to do, it can have a sprinkling of, the contemporary themes, politics or whatever, but largely you don't want to give anything away from the thing. So, that's the reason why I thought a discussion like this would possibly help the audience much more in trying to understand the thing. As to the question you've asked, you're absolutely right, but let me throw it back at, you know Anand Math. Now, Anand Math is a novel, but I would say in more ways than one, it is more of a non-fictional treatise than you would actually think of it as a novel, because it's so unbelievably
or realistically, let's put it this way, kind of gives a glimpse of essentially what India was at that point of time. I mean, it's not, you can say it's a fictional story or whatever, but you know, I mean, the things from, you still get goosebumps thinking about. So, I mean, I took the example of Naipaul, but there were many, even Indians before Naipaul, who were, you know, intertwining fiction with non-fiction, or the themes or the symbolism of it. I mean, at one level, it is a very symbolic thing. So, do you think the setting up of a narrative through a non-fictional stream is more powerful than a fictional stream? I mean, I asked this because I took the example of Anand. There are so many more, where you know, you want to rouse the readers, you want to rouse the national population, you know, the conscience of it. What is more rousing? Let's say an explanation or a description or elaboration of, let's say, a political figure, or weaving a story around that person and rousing. So,
but before we get there, I want to ask you a bit more fundamental question.
Yeah.
Is this whole divide of fiction and non-fiction, it's a very non-Indic kind of a construct, because in our scheme of things, I don't think there was something that there's a non-fiction stream, there's a fiction stream, including in the writing of history. The quote that is often attributed to Kalhana and in the Rajatarangini, where he says, Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesha samanvitam kathayuktam puravrittam itihasam ta chakshmate. You know, puravrittam, or the narratives of the past, which are told to you in a kathayuktam, in a story form, which also have a very essential upadesha samanvitam. There has to be a didactic element, there has to be a moral instruction to society about what is good, what is bad, and all of that. And in the attainment of the four purusharthas of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, that is called itihasa, and itihasa too is translated very vaguely, it thus happened. And our Puranas and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are collectively called the Itihasa Puranas, have just this. I mean, it's not just a dry documentation of facts like how the Western mind probably looked at history or documentation. It was embellished in a lot of storytelling. And we are a land of storytellers and kathakars. Over thousands of years, we have embellished the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, with so many narratives from different parts of India. It was almost the whole country was sitting and writing a story, a magnificent magnum opus or an epic, which had these different stories in it. But even if you go to the Mahabharata and you have the Bhishma Parva, where there are, I think, about 70 verses which talk in detail about the ethnography of India, the geography of the country itself, the different communities which were there in different parts, who were the people who came from outside to the Yavanas and the Shakhas and the Mlechas, and there's description of all of that. So how does one categorize that as non-fiction or fiction? This is a very English Western construct, because I think in the Indian imagination, all these, every field, whatever it is, whether it was mathematics, whether it was the sciences, or even history, it was all written in a kavya or a mahakavya format. The entire role of the kavi as a great drashta, or somebody who's a seer, like probably what Sanjay was doing in the middle of the Mahabharata war, sitting with Dhritarashtra, but actually able to see what was going on. This whole poet, the elevation of a poet from, so a poet in an English literature would just be a fiction, you categorize him there. But in the Indian imagination, a poet was so important. A historian also needed to be a poet. A mathematician also, wrote all his treatises in a poetry form. The Sulba Sutras, which apparently give us the Pythagoras theorem, if you go there, you wouldn't directly find, the square of the hypotenuse is the sum of the squares of the other two sides of a right angle. It will be in the form of a poetry.
So let me put you in a corner.
Where is, I was putting you in the corner, but where is your entire premise of this topic itself, fiction versus non-fiction, I think collapses when it comes to the Indian context.
To a very large extent, you're absolutely right. But then, do you believe when you talk of fiction being interwoven with non-fiction in our texts, So do you believe Ramayana has fictional parts of it?
Of course, there has to be, because all of them, I mean, including the Rajatarangini, which even Western, scholars call him as the only credible historian of India, the first historian Kalhana. But they have M.A. Stein, who has translated the Rajatarangini, said there are lots of fantastic stories, which there are. I mean, it is written in this hyperbole, it's a lot of exaggeration, and that's what makes it very readable and interesting. And maybe the joy of non-fiction has somehow evaporated only because we have not brought, and particularly history, which is taught and read in such a boring manner, in a country like this where we revel in stories and storytelling and all of that. It's quite a sad commentary that we don't look at it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I think the issue has a lot to do with the way the contemporary readers, they like to judge a work. I think they're a lot less indulging than they were maybe even 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. This interweaving of fiction with non-fiction right now, even in a tweet, you weave fiction with non-fiction and you're absolutely pilloried. It says, hey, where is the data? How dare you bring in a story? Just give me the points,
Yes.
So when you say, that's the reason why I asked you. The reason why Ramayana and Mahabharata have gone into the hearts of billions of people is because of the story part of it.
True. True.
But
that doesn't take away the truth or the historical, which, if you might want to call the non-fiction part of that that text, that is equally important for the common
which
masses.
part of Ramayana is non-fictional, do you think?
Everything, including, Professor B.B. Lal, who conducted a series of archaeological excavations on various, sites related to the Ramayana, or the dating of the Ramayana. People like Dr. Manish Pandit, who have been doing a lot of work on dating the Mahabharata war as to when that actually happened, using astronomy and, on the 18 days of the war, which nakshatra was in which, stage, and what was...
Oh, so you don't believe in the Romila Thapar thing that Mahabharata came after?
Well...
You knew that was coming.
I do believe in the fact that I think Yudhishthira was inspired by Ashoka and so on, but I don't believe in the other things that that school of historiography
The
says.
next step was Yudhishthira was a product of Ashoka University. I think that's... But you see what I mean? When you have glorious interweaving of fiction with non-fiction, in contemporary times or polarized times or whatever, I hate to use that word, but it's a beautiful word. I think people should be polarized. There is truth and there are lies. So, you have to be polarized. People have almost completely discarded the storytelling part of it. So for example, let's take Savarkar, there is absolutely nothing which is fictional about those two books that you have written on Savarkar. Were you to put in a fictional story, as it is, this fellow is pilloried so much, you would be completely hung from the nearest lamppost.
True. No, I think the genre that I love to write on, which is biography, I think it comes closest among all historical subgenres to the whole, literary-minded, writing. And I'll explain why. Because, I often liken a biography or the process of writing a biography to a love affair. You fall in love with an individual. There is the first instance is you fall in love with the person. You're enchanted. If you hate the person, of course, that is also an agenda. You can write a biography of someone you hate, whom you want to pull down. But then generally, you're enchanted. It need not be like itself. You're just enchanted by the enigma that person presents. And then, just as it happens in a common mundane love affair, you start stalking your love interest. Every letter that your subject has written, you start rummaging, and you probably get to know more about your subject than the subject knew about themselves, because you have a 360-degree view of their life, and their friends become your friends, their enemies almost subconsciously somewhere become, as Freud said, it's a kind of a transference that happens with the subject and the biographer, who is in a relatively unwooable condition, but still it's a love affair that proceeds. And just as it happens even in love, sometimes there is a breakup also in the process of the journey itself, where you're disillusioned with the character. You say, oh, I don't think I did the right thing in investing my time and emotion in it, and you drop it. But if you actually carry it forward and actually, start committing it to print, the biggest, ask of a biographer is to cut off those emotional cords from the subject. Because there is a very, very thin line between a biography and a hagiography. And that is the toughest task, because for several years you are invested emotionally and otherwise in that subject. But while writing to it, you are suddenly asked to become a neutral bystander and almost become, morally very distinct from the person, present them with warts and all, and that is how a biography becomes an honest biography.
When you, and very beautifully said, that writing a biography and, talk of Savarkar is almost like a love affair, you say, with the person you are writing. So your next book is on Tipu Sultan.
Yes, it is a love affair. It is a love affair with him as well. Right. Though, I mean, sar tan se juda ho jayega if that happens. But then, that's why I think I corrected
that. I mean,
myself.
Your position on Tipu is very clear. In fact, one of the first articles, definitive articles that I read that exposed Tipu was by Vikram in Mint, if I'm not mistaken, where you talked about Mandaya Iyengar not celebrating Tipu Jayanti even now, because on that day he hung 700 of them. So, I mean, with Savarkar, I can understand, there was this kind of enthusiasm. The person was an enigma before you unraveled him. You spent 5 years writing those 2 volumes. So I can understand how closely associated you felt with him. But would the same thing be with Tipu, or would you, would it be the same?
No, I think he is as much an enigma, and he intrudes our contemporary discourse all the time. In the state that I come from, there was a perverse attempt to do a Tipu Jayanti and so on, which was very, very pernicious according to me. So I think these are enigmatic figures. And Anand, to the earlier point that I was trying to make, I think Virginia Woolf, in her essay called The Art of Biography in 1931 or so, she had called biography as the most restrictive of all arts. Because a biographer is very, very similar to the tools and techniques that a novelist would employ, because you need to go into the heart of the character, you need to psychoanalyze them, you need to actually understand their motivations, you need to do all of that. But at the same time, a biographer is, I think, an artist under oath, where you can't make up things like a novelist might do. If you find blank spaces in the story of the person, because nobody documents their life completely, we would also leave the darkest chapters of our life undocumented so that it dies with us. So in those cases, a biographer is called upon to make conjectures, somehow connect the various things, which is where the novelist the person...
You never felt like taking that license, if I may use that word, of, not being...
This is turning out to be an interview of me. I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
It's the same thing, it's...
No, but tell me...
it's a pleasure interviewing Rahul Gandhi of the, the Bharat Jodo Yatra, so it's not...
I know this is a revenge for the Mysore Park defeat, but then that's fine. But, don't you think your tribe is the one responsible for this, which is what you actually do for a living, which is a scientist, which have actually percolated the humanities and this whole empiricist model of positivism in history, Leopold von Ranke, where everything you need empirical evidence to actually deduce.
Yes.
Do you think that has spoiled the humanities writing in general and history in particular?
Yes, and I think that's a great question, because let's think about this. Let's say you were to weave in a story, whatever angle it might be, from the character of Savarkar into this. I mean, I'm just juxtaposing Mahabharata, let us say, or Ramayana, where you said non-fiction is intertwined so beautifully with fiction. You would be taken to the cleaners, But on the other hand, if you were to say that, look, this is the book I have written, just read this book, how many people would trust you to say that, yes, indeed, there are some truths about Savarkar in this, facts, but there is also a story of Savarkar. Let me enjoy the book. Very few people right now are doing that, enjoying reading. You know, they want information out of it, so that possibly they can, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, you know. You're reading books so that you can glean some information, so that you can disseminate it on Twitter or any other place, or, you know, you can, sometimes it also is a game of one-upmanship. Somebody is given wrong facts, you read something to give the facts. So a book is almost, is become like a phone directory. It's become very impersonal. And that's a tragedy, because all the texts that you talked about, Mahabharata, Ramayana, they were very close to you. They were not just mere books. And when you talk about science, let me tell you why I enjoy writing, you know, fiction more than non-fiction, because in science, according to me, there is a clear demarcation between discovery and invention, you know. And I think it's a very beautiful demarcation. People discover things, scientists discover things all the time. But when you're discovering, please remember that thing already exists. You just found it. But when you're inventing, that thing did not exist. So which is, I mean, as a scientist or as a philosopher, you might think, which gives you more joy? To discover something or to invent something? And I think that's a very difficult question to answer. And there comes a time when you deal with a particular subject in science where both of those streams in science, it's a very, I mean, you talked of Mahabharata, where fiction is intertwined with non-fiction. So I can say discovery is intertwined with invention. But there are some subjects in science where the demarcation is very, very thin or very hard to, you know, disentangle. I'll give you a great example. Many people say Watson and Crick, you know, discovered the structure of DNA. They didn't discover it. Because discovery would mean that, well, actually, technically they did, because they looked at the X-ray crystal structure of DNA, Rosalind Franklin's this thing, and then, so that is discovering the structure of DNA. That gives you a hint that it is double helical. But at that point of time, they, according to me, they invented the structure, because the double helical structure was not yet published, the X-ray structure. That would have been discovering. So they invented the double helical structure of DNA. Like that, there are so many streams. I mean, archaeologists are discovering things. But, for example, Carey Mullis's invention of the polymerase chain reaction, everyone knows about RT-PCR during the COVID times. I mean, he got a Nobel Prize for it. That is an invention. That's not a discovery. The discovery is DNA polymerase that replicates the DNA and so on and so forth. So there is a very clear-cut demarcation. As to your question, whether that has been transposed to the literary domain, yes, I would say yes, and I think we are poorer for it. We have started really demarcating. I mean, I would love you, for you to write a fictional account having Savarkar in it. I can't remember reading. Do you remember reading any story based on Savarkar as a fiction, as a novel? There aren't. No, that's very strange, isn't it? I mean, it's a prominent historical figure.
Well, in regional languages, yeah, a lot of Indian languages there would be, but
yeah, right. Whereas, I mean, if you look at Gandhi, I mean, there's huge fictional accounts starting with my experiments with truth. You know, so, sorry. You knew that was coming. No, but, or Nehru, for example. There are a lot of fictional accounts.
Like?
Discovery of India, start with one. But, so this thing about invention and discovery. Now let's take Naipaul as an example. I mean, one huge genre where he kind of, I would say, pioneered was travel writing, but then he mixed his own psychoanalysis of the place where he was going, or, you know, philosophical aspects of it, as a crystal ball gazing, I mean, Beyond the Belief or Among the Believers and so many other books, Million Mutinies now, where he predicts what India is going to be. That is a genre of entirely non-fictional account of Naipaul going to a place, writing non-fictional, but it's actually, I mean, the term people use loosely is literary non-fiction. Yes. But it is more than just an account. So why do we not see more of that amongst the non-fiction writers?
No, I think it is changing now. term of literary or narrative non-fiction. So I'll give you an example. Maybe with people like Savarkar, who are as it is contested and very, politically surcharged characters, it might be difficult to take, a lot of liberties. But in I'll just give an example from my, one of the earlier books I wrote on Gohar Jan. That was a safer topic. No one would really care about this person, who was actually India's first recorded artist on the gramophone. When gramophone and recording technology came to India in 1902, this was the person who first recorded for the gramophone company from London. So, in the Mysore Palace archives, where I was researching about her, there were all these documents that, she was a superstar, but then reduced to beggary and penury and so on. And she had taken shelter in the court of the Maharaja of Mysore in 1928. And there were all these letters that she had written to the Diwan of Mysore, to the Darbar Bakshi, saying, can you please, increase my salary? It's just 500 rupees. Can you not cut my income tax? Because that is, I'm having to pay all my accompanying musicians with the same meager amount and all of that. And I'd gone to that place where she was given a little place to live in called Dilkush Cottage. It's a beautiful, stunning, place with a canopy of trees all over, and there's Chamundi hills in the background and all that. And she was very upset that she was given such, little, emolument. So in the opening to that book, with all this archival material, I just weaved in a story that, there was a carriage that came across, with the royal insignia of the Mysore royal family, which seemed to indicate that there was a very important guest sitting inside that carriage, and then it stopped in front of Dilkush, and out stepped a lady with and there were her photographs there, so I knew how she looked. So someone with a gold-rimmed glass and a walking stick, and she came out limping, and then she read the letter which had this thing that, you're given only 500 rupees, and then she throws it away in disgust and say, what do they take me for? Do they think I'm a whore who'll just take whatever they give me, and so on? And then she starts arranging all the luggage that she's brought along with her, and the maid drops the gramophone record of hers, and she's so devastated, and then she kind of looks at herself at that time in the mirror and sees that she has a disheveled hair, she has dark circles and all of that, and then she breaks down crying, saying, what have you done to your life? So, I mean, that almost opens like a novel, but it is based on a lot of facts. It is based on the archival letters. It's based on the geography of the place that this person lived in. It doesn't take away much from the content, but it just makes for the problem you cited. It makes for interesting reading, which is what I think narrative non-fiction is all about, which kind of intertwines what we spoke about. May not be in that fantastic a manner as our epics did, but somehow it tries to intertwine storytelling with non-fiction. This whole idea that non-fiction needs to be boring, needs to be insipid, it's just a catalogue of facts, I think that strips it away of all the interest and the rasa that is there in that.
And I completely agree with you, and I think this is where I want to bring in a question which, when we throw it open to the audience as well, I'd like their response as well, because my younger sister is looking at the bell right now. She's already given me, but I think we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so. Older sister. You talked about interweaving of fiction with non-fiction. I'll give you an example why the audience is so polarized that they understand the non-fiction part of it, but they want to use the fictional part as a stick to beat you with. Let me take another example. I mean, you talked about Gohar Jan. That required a lot of indulgence of the readers. And I dare say, because she was a non-controversial figure, so readers indulged in the subject. Not so the case with Kashmir Files. The Kashmir Files is based on real events that actually transpired. Those are completely non-fictional events. They happened, the genocide happened, the ethnic cleansing happened, the Nadi Magh massacre happened, Girija Tiku's thing happened, Ganju, Mr. Ganju was shot dead, and the rice laced with his blood was fed to his, all those are real instances. from the rooftops of mosques, you know, Pandits, you go but leave your women behind, Nizamim, all those things are true. And yet, when a story is woven through these non-fictional true accounts, Kashmir Files is branded as vulgar propaganda, as fake. Still, I mean, and it's not just the people who hate Vivek Agnihotri, and there's a long list of those, you know, are saying this. His own contemporary, his peers. I mean, I saw a real obnoxious interview of an obnoxious man. So it's to the power of two. Prakash Raj. Yeah, I mean, it was so sad to, I mean, he is pillorying his own peer by saying that guy is a propagandist, is a horrible, vulgar film, and, you know, it's all fake and everything. That's what I'm saying. So readers are not, they are actually, so the writer has intertwined fiction with non-fiction to tell a tale that is woven around the non-fictional events. Rather than the readers appreciating that, they've actually disentangled it. And they are using the fictional account as a stick to beat the thing. So isn't that a dangerous territory? That
No, Anand, but tell me, if, forget a film, if Vivek Agnihotri had made a documentary film, would they have accepted it then as just a catalogue of facts? If you don't want to accept something, whether you show it as a fiction or a non-fiction, your opponent is not going to take that, right? Of course, as you rightly said, here it becomes an easy stick to beat him with. Another eminent historian who has always been a cricket commentator, actually in a recent interview said it's the Amit Shah, Vivek Agnihotri school of historiography. So that is the disparaging attitude that is taken.
He's the same historian who said Shivaji was a regional leader and there should not be any road named on Shivaji.
Yeah. Much more than just a regional leader. He said many other things which we should not quote here.
Yes, yeah.
But if it was a documentary film only laced with facts and no fiction, do you think those who have an agenda against India or have a narrative about Kashmir would have actually accepted and said, oh, now we'll accept it because it's only facts? That's either way, if you don't want to accept something, you will not, isn't it?
So what's the solution here? I mean, you can't write fiction without being pilloried. You can't write non-fiction without being pilloried. You mix the two and then you're pilloried. I mean, what does a writer do?
Grow a thick hide to get pilloried all the time and understand that you're doing what you're doing with the courage of your conviction and with a clear conscience. And I think the solution that way is, I mean, fiction needs to have, if it is, based on real facts and so on, it needs to be well researched. On the other side, non-fiction needs to be made interesting and presented as a story. The research should be very, very meticulous, but it should be accessible. What is the point of having well-researched tomes which, gather dust in some library shelf? It has to reach out to the common people who would like to read it. Pick it up from an airport bookshelf and read even what is heavy-duty history or geopolitics or whatever. So I think that is the only way, which in some way we're now intertwining the two, where fiction, historical fiction needs to be well researched. It can't be completely made up. Non-fiction needs to be made interesting. And the third solution is, as I said, not be so sensitive to what every dog that barks on the street, what do they say?
Yeah. But, so here let me ask you a question that I'm sure, right, I'm not the first one to ask this question, because I'm certain a lot of people from the film world would want to make a authoritative film on Savarkar.
Not at all, because I don't think Bollywood would even want to touch Savarkar with a barge pole.
Is that right?
And yeah, unfortunately,
no one has approached you for film
they
rights?
have, but then not the serious kind of filmmakers. At least not the mainstream Bollywood. Okay.
Because my question was, how comfortable would you be to see Savarkar's story that you have written intertwined with a fictional account that weaves into the facts of Savarkar?
A love affair thrown somewhere.
Correct.
And yeah. No, I think that would be quite unfortunate to do that, because maybe a new character can be introduced in the plot with Savarkar's life being very sacrosanct, because that is
so
based
you
on
yourself
facts.
Don't like fiction being interwoven with non-fiction?
No, I mean, you can't, you can't make up things about a person who is a very real person, right? I mean, yeah, a love affair which didn't exist. How can you just say, it is also defamatory. His grandson can go and sue you in court that, you know, you've brought up these, and that's not fiction, that is sleaze. So, or anything like that, that is not acceptable. But yeah, fictional elements could be a friend of his who actually did not exist. The main character needs to be what it is, but the circumstances in which they operated, that could perhaps be fictionalized a bit, right?
Yeah, but then again, I mean, I completely get you. You can't do that sort of thing now. What I wanted to...
Well, we had that recent film where Gandhi and Godse, where apparently I have not seen the film, but I think those who saw, and some of you might have, it speaks about how Gandhi and Godse actually have a conversation with each other and thrash out their differences or whatever. Gandhi survives the assassination attempt and then tries to meet Godse, and then both of them get a hearing. Now, this is in some way a redemption for Godse, whose voice was never heard, though he gave his testimony in court, a very, very elaborate 80-page...
Which was banned by Nehru, by the way.
Banned for several years till the 1970s. This gives him a chance to probably speak his voice, and probably we've not even heard Gandhi's defense of all the allegations that Godse and you know, people of his ideological tilt had against him. So that way there is some way, you know, a reconstruction of a historical problem where the two characters somehow reconcile.
But this is what I mean, Vikram, because you've written the biography of Savarkar so authoritative. Every fact about him, every truism, everything that happened, you have not only catalogued it, you have told it to the world. Now, transpose yourself to thousands of years ago when you talked about that a lot of fictional stories have been interwoven with non-fictional accounts in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So the lords, the gods and goddesses have been, you know, their stories have also been fictionalized. They did this, they did that, all those things. But now you're saying that don't do it with Savarkar. Why? Because you have given his true factual picture. Had you not done it, people would have written things about Savarkar, interwoven fiction with non-fiction.
Not true. I mean, you ask my personal opinion, I would be a little uncomfortable because as, you know, I'm so close to the facts, but then stories around these people as the background and around that making a story is what historical fiction is all about. Yeah. And translating that to celluloid is what a period film probably does.
Right. I mean the film that won 8 Oscars, Gandhi.
Yes.
A lot of fictional elements in that actually never happened. Yeah, I mean, so out of 3 hours, I would say 2 hours and 59 minutes was pure fiction, which is the opportune moment to throw it open to the audience if they have any questions. Please, yeah. Sure.
My question is for Anand Ranganathan, sir. So, one of the strongest allegations,
Would you like a mic?
You will hear me?
Yes.
So, sir, one of the strongest allegations that people in general, right, throw against us, that's the Indic or the right wing, is associating us with pseudoscience. So whatever these people talk, pseudoscience, right? So, like they like, you know, they throw around a lot of pseudoscience. So whatever they talk is rubbish.
Pseudoscience, like we believe Earth is flat?
No. Not like that, right? See, my point is that, yes, there were, like, you know, like MPs from the ruling party and all who spoke some things that is, you can associate, like when say that's pseudoscience and all that. So they use that as the strongest bullet to rubbish whatever is, like, you know, spoken from the. So how do you counter that, sir? As a scientist yourself, how do you counter that?
It's very easy because, as I say, it's very easy to expose the hypocrisy. There was one lady who, you know, belonged to a particular religion, and she was mocking a minister who did not believe in evolution. And I said, that's very funny because you believe that your prophet went on a winged horse. You believe that water turned into wine. You believe the earth is flat, the moon was split in two, and yet you are saying that that fellow doesn't believe in evolution. You're mocking him. So, yeah, I mean, if you believe in all those miracles, you know, then how can you mock someone who believes in another miracle? So, I mean, for me, that's a
So this, what you're talking about, is not exactly like the people from the left wing, right? Typically, they say that we are the intellectual class and all that, right? They are like who are atheists and this one, right? So when they do that, like how do you counter it, like, right? I'm not talking about what you're talking is like people belonging to the Christian this one and all that, right? But people who are atheists or claim to be rationalists. So.
Right. So please make a distinction between the leftists who say they are atheists and the true atheists who are Darwinian atheists. Leftists are not atheists; they are cultists. They belong to a religion that was their god is Marx. So they are wrong all the time, not just most of the time.
See, a short comment and two questions, one for each of you. Very interesting discussion on fiction, non-fiction coming together. And I'd like to draw the attention of the audience to a fictional work written by two very prominent chemists, Roald Hoffmann and Carl Gerasi.
We have a booming voice.
No, see, the book is called Oxygen, and it was written by Roald Hoffmann and Carl Gerasi, both extremely prominent chemists. It is clearly a fictional work. There were three chemists in the 18th century who were involved in the discovery of oxygen. This was Scheele in Sweden, Priestley in England, and Lavoisier in France. And all three of them played a part in discovering this element, oxygen. So the fictional story is, suppose Nobel Prizes existed in those days. Which of these three fellows would have got the Nobel Prize? So I think a thing like that is clearly fiction because there was no Nobel Prize at that time. And yet the whole thing, and Hoffman himself got a Nobel Prize. And Gerasi narrowly missed getting a Nobel Prize. So there was a particular poignancy in this fictional work. But there is fiction, there is non-fiction, and the whole thing comes together in a way in which it is very difficult to define this work as even fiction or non-fiction. I think this is something that in the context of this particular discussion is very interesting. Now, two short questions. You said when you write a biography, you have to be sort of in love with the subject, which I mostly agree with. Now, I want to ask you, if a person writes an autobiography, is he or she in love with himself or herself? That's my question to you. And Anand, the question for you is, are you really sure that Crick and Watson invented the DNA?
Yes, that's a great question, and I put in the rider because Watson had seen the diffraction pattern of the DNA, of Rosalind Franklin. So you can say the invention part was much less than the discovery part. But it is also a fact that they brought in a lot of Chagaff's, discovery that A and T are the same amount and C and G are the same amount. So there was a lot of things that would have gone in had they not seen the diffraction pattern of the DNA that showed it to be double helical. They would have invented the structure. I mean, Pauling, for example, invented the structure of DNA and he got it completely wrong. I mean, the Pauling structure that came in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if not in the same issue, in the same volume of Nature, where Watson and Crick's structure came, and Pauling got it completely wrong. I mean, the bases are flying out, and the phosphorus, the chain is actually in the middle. It should be at the end of the both things. So people get the invention part wrong spectacularly, not so much the discovery part, because you can't get the discovery part wrong because you're discovering something. It's already, it existed. As to the, the next question was for?
Well, that's a very interesting line of thought which I'd never really, thought about. I do think now on reflection from the question that an autobiographer is a very narcissistic person who thinks that his or her story is so worthwhile that it needs to be committed to print. I don't know how objective and honest one can be, because, you know, Emily Wordsworth had said, abyss has no biographer. You know, the lowest you know, points of our lives, we somehow keep it, or the things that we are ashamed of ourselves, we probably don't even document it, and we want it to, as we discussed earlier, die with us. So as long as it is not an attempt at self-glorification and the same kind of dispassion that I'd spoken about, which is a prerequisite for a biographer, if the same thing happens with in an autobiography, I think then it would transcend narcissism. Just like there, it would transcend the borders of hagiography.
If I can add to that, that's a very pertinent question, because I can't think of very many autobiographers who've, you know, who've actually been so true and who've given an absolute ruthlessly objective account. I think you have to be completely mad in order to do that. Not to care, or, you know, to do tyaga. I think then you can, but even then I'm not very sure. Only one name comes to mind, Pasolini, the famous film director. I mean, he was actually a bit mad, so he was so true that it was revolting what he explained, what he had done in his life. Gandhi comes very close, I'll be very honest with you, because some of the things that he said he's going to do, even Rajaji said, Rajagopalaji, Gandhiji, please do it, but please don't say it to the world that you are doing it. But Gandhi wrote about it. For example, you know, sleeping with Manu and Abha, he said, I want to write about that. I mean, you have to enter that mad zone in order to do that. But people who are sensible and rational, it's very difficult to be that objective. And I'll give you a great example. One of the greatest books by Naipaul is actually The Enigma of Arrival. It is a novel, but it is 100% non-fiction. And how do you know that? Because Naipaul himself talks about it, and his biographer in Naipaul's biography, I forget the name, is very good. The World is What It Is. I forget the name of the biographer. So it's very clear. Everything about that novel is non-fiction. But Naipaul gets scared because in that the protagonist is a wife beater, which Naipaul was. The protagonist goes to, you know, prostitutes, which Naipaul did. All the things that Naipaul did, he makes the protagonist do. And that is where the non-fictional account becomes a fictional account. It's very beautiful.
So we have actually run out of time.
We've run out of time. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Coming to Pondicherry is the best. Okay. In the next session, we have Nandini Sengupta, journalist and author, in conversation with our very own Alu Pal on her book Rani Durgavati, The Forgotten Life of a Warrior Queen.
So good morning and welcome to the first of the book talks. This is more in-house than you think, because right from the very first edition of the Pondy Lit Fest, in our delegated works, Nandini and I used to sit and create the book talks and the book lists in our own little corner, so that this aspect of the Lit Fest was always present. So Nandini, so good to have you. Never imagined this sort of a session would ever happen.
I'm so glad, and this is pure grace, nothing else. It's just pure grace.
I'm so happy to see you here. So Nandini, I think taking off from the previous session, my first question to you would be this. You have written a historical fiction account, a trilogy in fact of the Gupta series. And then today with Rani Durgavati, it's your first non-fiction. So taking off from what Vikram and Anand just said in the previous session, how much of fiction do you allow, and what is the category? How do you decide that these elements will not deviate from the truth? How do you make the distinction when you write your non-fiction?
So thanks, Alo. Actually, that was a brilliant discussion, but the point I'm going to make here is that historical fiction actually can be a bit of a minefield. The reason why is when you are mixing fact and fiction, the reader can, and often does, get confused and accept the fiction for fact. I'll give an example. Those of you who read Bangla in this audience, you will know about a very famous book called Shei Shomoy, written by Sunil Gangopadhyay. So an award-winning book on Kaliprashanna Singho, who's a historical figure. Now, in that book, Sunil Gangopadhyay seems to suggest that Kaliprashanna Singho was actually an illegitimate child. There is no historical account for that. But because the book became a cult book, this particular element, of course the book is brilliant and it encompasses many, many historical characters, including Michael Madhusudan Datta and others. But people have picked on this, and this has become a pernicious thing that they accept to be true. This is very dangerous. And this is something that historical fiction does suffer from. In the case of the Guptas, for instance, I made it very clear in the foreword that these are the aspects of the story which are historically true. And I also made it very clear where I have deviated from history when it comes to a historical personage. If it is a fictional personage, you can do whatever, that person can hang from the ceilings, doesn't really matter. But if I'm talking about Samudragupta, if I'm talking about Chandragupta, Vikramaditya, these are historical characters. And I have woven in fiction, but I've made it very clear in the introduction that these elements are fictional. Do not take it as true.
Thank you, because ever since that particular session was decided upon, I'll say if I have a non-fiction and a fiction writer sitting with me, this is the first question I'll ask. Okay, moving on to your non-fiction book, Rani Durgavati. I will give my impressions later, but to start with, I'm so happy you came up with this, because these are the forgotten legends and heroes that we could well do with. So first of all, congratulations on a very well-written book. It's written with, it's non-fiction, so she has sourced herself from sources that are dependable, but the writing style is very fast-moving. So it reads very, very fast and very, very well. So that's, congratulations for that. So my first question to you would be, there are three ways in which we can divide this particular book. One is when the kingdom prospered. Gondwana prospered. You can situate it for us. And then you have a particular decline that takes place when the Mughals came. And then you have the decimation of the space when the British came. So this could be a way by which we could divide the account. So to begin with, can you situate the kingdom? And can you give us the sources of prosperity and what that space was? Second to, I think, which is the other empire, which is just bigger. It was among the second or the third biggest empire.
After Vijayanagar.
Yeah, after Vijayanagar. So can you just situate that for us? Then we'll take it from there.
Okay, so Rani Durgavati was a tribal queen of central India. Her kingdom encompassed what in current day would be the districts of Jabalpur, Dindori, Damo, Hoshangabad, Narsinghpur, and all that surrounding areas. So this is a very beautiful, very untouched part in the heart of India, washed by the holy Narmada. Now, Rani Durgavati herself was not Gond. She was a Rajput princess. So the reason why I was so astonished, and I totally agree with Vikramji, who talked about being in love with with the subject you're a biographer of. I am totally in awe of Rani Durgavati because she is such a fantastic example of how you can break the rules even without breaking the rules. And she is a thoroughly modern medieval monarch. And so she was a Rajput. She marries in an intercaste marriage, and we are talking 16th century here. She marries a tribal Gond prince. And when he passes away, from all accounts, they have a very successful, very happy marriage. He passes away rather sooner, and at that point, again, she pushes the envelope because she has a very grudging brother-in-law lurking in the background, who of course has very interesting ideas of running the kingdom himself with her little minor child as the puppet king. But she fobs him off so well that for the next 15 years, as long as she is alive and on the throne, he never sets foot in Gara, like ever. So she, and over the next 15 years, she fobs off 51 skirmishes from her, jealous neighbors. And of course, the last of that was the battle that she had with Akbar's very senior general, Asaf Khan. And the interesting point about Rani Durgavati, and this is where, we talk a little bit about the narrative. See, the thing is that when we look at our history books typically talk about big battles which we have lost. So, Battle of Panipat, Battle of Haldighati, we are losing battles. So we kind of tend to think that, we as a people, we don't win battles. The reason I love this story is because what a kick-ass woman, even the last battle, which if you go to Wikipedia, they'll say Rani Durgavati was a Gond queen who was defeated by Akbar's general Asaf Khan. End of story. But that's not her story, because even in the last battle, she actually won the first part of the battle. And for 15 years that she was on the throne, she never lost a single battle, not one. So her story is not a story about loss.
So the Gond area is essentially a highly forested area, inaccessible. The terrain itself played in favor of them being isolated and prosper. So tell us a little bit about what contributed to their prosperity and how she took care of her people. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I suppose in a session like in Pondy Lit Fest, you must understand as factually as possible the specific policies taken up by invaders and colonists who have systematically deconstructed what worked so well in our kingdoms for centuries. So tell us a little bit about where her wealth came from.
Okay, so I'll start off with the reason why Monsieur Asaf Khan, Akbar's general, wanted to attack Garha Mandala, which is Rani Durgavati's kingdom in the first place. Now you would wonder, it's a remote tribal kingdom, right? Why would Delhi be interested in them? The reason was that they were a phenomenally rich kingdom. And how do we know this? We know this because in 1908, in and around Jabalpur, a cache of coins was discovered. All right, and these coins were from all over, from Gulbarga, from Kashmir, from Gujarat, from the Deccan, including coins from Nepal. And these are all gold coins. Now, where did these coins come from? And what were they doing in the heart of India, which is like a remote, tribal, forested area? The reason that they were there is because Garha was a very important trading center. What did they trade? They traded in forest produce, of course, but they also traded in elephants, who were very important for medieval warfare. And they also were a grain bowl. So none other than Mughal hagiographer Abul Fazl himself mentions in the Akbarnama that Garha was sending grain to places like Gujarat and the Deccan. So this is a grain bowl, this is a trading post, they were selling elephants, and so they were a phenomenally rich country. And people of Garha used to pay their taxes either in forest produce and elephants or gold mohurs. We also find that the kings and queens of Garha actually minted gold coins. You have to understand this is 16th century. There weren't that many Hindu kingdoms that were minting gold coins, including the Rajputs. They used to use the Mughal coinage. But this is a kingdom that was minting gold coins, not once, not twice, but several times over a period of time. And we have numismatic evidence for that. So clearly this was a very, very rich kingdom. What happened to them when they lost their independence? This is a very important question, because what the Mughals did was, of course, first and foremost, they were lured by loot. They wanted the money. That's the reason why they invaded Garha. So they ransacked and looted the main forts of the kingdom, particularly Chauragarh Fort, or what is today known as Chaugan Killa. So Chauragarh Fort was ransacked and looted, and then the Mughal system of governance was very centralized. So what happened was that they used to appoint Jagirdars, right? And these Jagirdars would be constantly transferred. So over a period of 20-25 years, Garha became a revolving door. And Mughal Jagirdars came and went. A succession of Mughal Jagirdars came and went. Now, if you are not going to spend very much time in a place, and you know that your Jagirdari is going to die with you, it's not something that you will leave behind for your family, what are you going to do? You will try and extract as much as you can from that land, so that after sending the emperor his share, you get to keep the rest for yourself. As a result of which, Garha became more and more and more impoverished. And then what happened? Then came the British. Even more interesting, because the British were the worst of the lot. They just casually decided that the Gonds of Garha, who had always lived off the forest, did not need to have any access to the forest. So when the Central Provinces was set up in 1861 under Sir Richard Temple, they just restricted access of the Gonds to the best forest lands. And if you read the book, you will see how Gond folk songs and folk tales, the desperation in those songs and tales, as they were systematically cut off from what was their traditional source of livelihood. And slowly Garha became a center of destitution and death, as famines and disease swept through the land. So this is what the Golden Gourd was reduced to.
So one of the questions that comes to mind, that even you have tried to answer in the book, is that considering the fact that there were overtures by the kingdom to show that they were not the enemies of the Mughals. It's in the time, the contemporary Mughal emperor was Akbar. Why did he choose to, why did he sanction Asaf Khan to attack Gond? So here, maybe we should spend some time in looking at Akbar a little bit more in detail, because, he's also Akbar the Great. So let's look at this great aspect a little bit. Let's give it some timelines, because I verified with Meenakshi ji also before asking you this question, because 2 Jauhars took place in his reign.
Yes.
One was in Gondwana and the other one was in Chittor. And so what is this eclectic religion he did it, and at what time in his rule, as opposed to actually causing 2 Jauhars to take place because of his attacks on 2 kingdoms. So can you, let's just talk a little bit about him. Let's just reposition him a little bit in history and his attitude. And especially, I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding, it's a gross misunderstanding as to his intentions to be inclusive. It was very, very tactical. It was not philosophical or spiritual. So can you just dwell on that a little bit? I think it's very important.
Thank you, Alo. So the problem with Mr. Akbar is that we have turned him into Akbar the Great, whereas he should be just Jalal. So, he is just Jalal. Because, you see, there are 2-3 things that you have to understand. Number one is that Akbar's whole Sulhi-Kul journey began in the late 1570s, by which time he had already been on the throne for more than 25 years. So he was not a tolerant and, this secular. First of all, we keep talking about Akbar being secular. I don't think as a medieval monarch he would understand secularism, even if it came and bit him on the nose. So the point is that he became an interesting ruler, and interesting for a medieval ruler. He became that towards the latter half of his reign. But for the first couple of decades of his reign, he was a very, very different person, and certainly not the great. What do I mean by that? Let's look at, and Alo has already talked about this, let's look at the two jawhars that happened during Akbar's reign. The first was the jawhar that happened in the fort of Chauragarh after Durgavati was killed and after her son, Bir Narayan, was killed in battle. The second was, this was 1564. The second was after the battle of Haldighati. After the battle of Chittor, after the siege of Chittor, which was just about 3 years later. Interestingly, both these big battles, the person who's common to them is Asaf Khan, who's Akbar's general. And also we have to understand that while Asaf Khan may have been, certainly the trigger for him was loot, because like all medieval invaders, he thought that a rich kingdom ruled by a woman was low-hanging fruit. We have to understand that he would not have been able to do what he did if he did not have imperial sanction, which he did. And in fact, if you look at Akbar's policy, everywhere that he plans an invasion, he first positions a Mughal Jagirdar as close to that place as possible, and that is followed by a military mandate. That's what happened in the case of Durgavati as well. Asaf Khan became the governor of Garhakatinga, Manikpur, and then he was given the mandate to go after the Baghel Raja of Rewa, and then of course he decided that Durgavati was a low-hanging fruit, he just had to take over the kingdom. Similarly, when Akbar decided to go against the Sisodias, and in the Chittor raid, again Asaf Khan Harvi was positioned as close to Chittor as humanly possible, which was followed by a military mandate. So Akbar very clearly knew what he was doing. He wanted, for his own reasons, to annex these kingdoms. Of course, the Sisodias, he had a different reason for that, but in the case of Durgavati, I think he was driven by political exigencies, as well as the fact that he, like most medieval men, decided that why should a Hindu queen be there, ruling a very prosperous kingdom independently. She just needed to be part of the overarching Mughal ambitions in central India. And remember, at that point, Akbar had also gone and attacked other central Indian kingdoms, including Baz Bahadur, who was Durgavati. Malwa was right next to Durgavati's kingdom, and Baz Bahadur was Durgavati's neighbor. So Akbar had an overarching plan for central India. Durgavati was part of it. Akbar had an overarching plan for Rajputana. The Sisodias were at the center of it. So we have to look at it as part of his exigency. And as far as Akbar's being tolerant goes, is the great moniker. His journey with Sulikul and his journey with, looking at different religions and finding out more about them and all that happens much later. The earlier Akbar was a very different man. If I have your permission, I'd just like to read out a small 3-4 lines from the Fathnama-i Chittor. I just want to read it out to you, and then you can tell me whether you think it is Akbar the Great or just Jalal. Let's see. These are Akbar's own words. This is a imperial diktat, Fathnama, right? And this is what he has said after the battle of Chittor, after the siege of Chittor. This is his own words. We spend our precious time to the best of our ability in war, or Gaza, and jihad. And with the help of eternal God, who is the supporter of our ever-increasing empire, we are busy in subjugating the localities, habitations, forts, and towns which are under the possession of the infidels, may God forsake and annihilate all of them, and thus raising the standard of Islam everywhere, and removing the darkness of polytheism and violent sins by the use of the sword. We destroy the places of worship of idols in those places and other parts of India. Unquote. That's Akbar the Great for you. So what I'm saying is that his whole journey, he was certainly an unusual monarch, but the point I'm making is he was by no means the only unusual medieval monarch, and there were many, many others, Durgavati included, who were just as tolerant, which was born out of political exigency and genuine love of scholarship. But he became this tolerant and rather benevolent character many, many years later, not at the beginning.
Actually, that's a very good point she makes. I mean, we talk a lot about Akbar being accepting, but the fact is that there were many others who did the same. Why is it that we do not give those kings that space? And why is it that there is this one monarch that we keep talking about who in the latter half of his life became tolerant, quote unquote, and he is glorified in his era, whereas lots of others did it. My next question to you, Nandini, unfortunately, is the fact that you have in the title of your book, Forgotten Life. Which brings me also to the fact that you have had to use a lot, your sources are two. One are chroniclers of the time, and the other is very steeped in on what you get, the signals you get from folklore. So can you talk to us about these two sources, and what can you glean in terms of non-fiction from the songs? And also, of course, the way Abul Fazl, even being part of Akbar's court, talks about Durgavati, and what, so that we know the basis of the construct of your history.
So Rani Durgavati's story is the story of memories. Why she was remembered and she continues to be remembered, and why she was forgotten. And if we look at Rani Durgavati's stories, there are 3 or 4 sources of what we call primary information about her. The first, of course, is Abul Fazl's Akbarnama. But Abul Fazl was by no means the only Mughal chronicler who wrote about Rani Durgavati. There were others like Badauni, Ferishta, and there were several Sanskrit secular works which talk about Rani Durgavati, including the Samayalok, which is a treatise that was commissioned by Rani Durgavati during her reign and was written by Padmanabha Mishra Bhattacharya, who was a poet in her court. And there are also temple inscriptions. The Ramnagar temple inscription is a very good source of information about Rani Durgavati. There are numismatic evidences which we look at. But apart from these, what I have mined for the book are folk tales and folk songs about the Queen. And today, if you go to Jabalpur and the surrounding areas, to this day, the Gonds sing about the Rani, to this day. And the songs about her, and this is why she is interesting, that Rani Durgavati died on the 24th of June, 1564. That's nearly 460 odd years ago. But for the last 5 centuries, the songs about her have remained unchanged. She is a symbol of, she's a combination of protection and piety. She is a symbol for the Gonds of deliverance. Whenever they think about their past, whenever they want to escape their present, they hark back to her rule. Pura Rajma Sonaka Sikka. You know, that is what her rule was, a golden age. And again you find Gond folk tales and folk songs referencing the Rani. And that has remained unchanged for 5 centuries. Mind you, I want to point this out, that when it comes to actual primary sources, there can be some reasons for spin doctrine. For instance, if you look at the Ramnagar inscription, they have tried to sort of devalue the Battle of Narayanala, or the Battle of Damo, because by that time, this was about 100 years after Rani Durgavati, the Gonds were then part of the Mughal Empire. They were vassal kings of the Mughals. So they did not want to piss off the reigning Mughal emperor, which was Shah Jahan. So they called Shah Jahan like Arjuna, and they call Asaf Khan is like Bhima in prowess, and that it was just a tax raid. Despite these attempts at official spin doctoring, if you go to Jabalpur to this day, popular opinion and folk tales and songs universally despise Asaf Khan and Akbar. It hasn't worked. So remember that this is a people, they are holding on to the narrative. I mean, Vikramji and Anand were just talking about the narrative. This is how they have held on to their narrative. For 5 centuries, that narrative about the Queen has not changed.
Yeah. My next question is, again, to understand her story, her success as well as her failure, and the way we govern land is federated structures. So it's very interesting that tribals were always given a certain sense of very practical autonomy, so that their life, the livelihood, their the osmotic relationship they had with the forests, in the very sustainable way in which they actually exploited that resource, needed to have a certain sense of federated autonomy. Now, as far as administration is concerned, tell us how that worked. And as far as military is concerned, tell us how that worked too, and how it played out in her life.
So it's interesting, because if you look at the Rajgond dynasty, which is where Durgavati came from, and you look at the folk songs and folk tales of the region, Garha and surrounding areas, you will find that over centuries, they deify or they sing praises of their kings and queens. Of course, Rani Durgavati has been turned into a goddess, but even others. And it is the outsiders who are looked at as enemies. Naam Asaf Dusman ke. So it is the outside, it is the Mughal, it is the British. The Goras are bad, the Mughals are bad. And our kings and queens have our interest at heart. The reason why this narrative persists is because for the longest time when the Rajgonds were in power, they followed a kind of very decentralized federal structure. Let me talk about Durgavati herself. She had 52 Garha. Garha, it's like a 4th district. So she had about 52 Gars under her control. But these Gars, most of them, had their own little structure, and her control was limited to the fact that when she went to battle, they would come and give her men and arms. So it was like a very decentralized nature. The army and the actual law and administration of those Garhas was handled by the local Raja or Rai. And they used to call themselves either Raja or Rai. But they were under the Rajgond monarchs of the day, whoever the Rajgond monarch was. Now, in Durgavati's case, she had about 23,000 villages, which were directly under her. Even these, half of them were more or less controlled federally by the Gar districts. So you can imagine that unlike the Mughal structure, which was centralized, and there was a central authority, which was the imperial command, who would send Jagirdars to various corners of the kingdom. This was not like that. This was a hereditary post, including down to the villages. So you will say that, say for instance, a Gar district will have 1,000 villages. Now in the village, the Patwari would be your unit of law and order. And that role was also hereditary. So you had a very decentralized hereditary structure, and matters of law and order would come to the queen only when they had not been settled by the local Patwari or the local Raja. Very, very federal. Now, what this means is that the people obviously loved the structure because it gave them a lot of freedom. But what it means is, militarily, in medieval terms, this was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. Why was it a disaster? Because The queen's army, therefore, she had to depend on her 52 Garha Rajas to send her soldiers. Those soldiers were armed, trained by the respective Garha Rajas, which means they were not of uniform quality. Many of them were not well trained. And how good they were in battle depended on how good a commander that Garha Raja was. Some of them were very good, some of them were not so good. So the army that she had at her disposal was not uniformly trained, not uniformly armed, and not of uniform quality. And that affected the final consequence of the last battle in her life.
But having said that, it's true that she talked about the 50+ skirmishes she had with the border districts. So there is a very good description of the battle she fought with Baz Bahadur, and the strategies she used in order to neutralize the Baz Bahadur's advantages. So that's a very interesting part of the book. Now let's talk about the queen a little bit. You know, you're a woman, I'm a woman, she's a goddess. To me, she is a goddess. These ancient monarchs, not ancient actually, the Hindu monarchs, they had such a beautiful, unself-conscious, spontaneous relationship with dharma. So you had an entire aspect of their life gone in building temples, and the entire ecological and economic spin-offs that come off the temple building, and the respect for the environment. You know, if you do not feed your kingdom, then your kingdom is sad. So talk to us a little bit about this lady in her 15 years, the amount she took care. Because my sister is a farmer, she'll tell you how deep the water tables are going down in the farm, and and how we need to conserve water. Here is a lady who made catchment ponds, not one, not two. So tell us a little bit about this relationship. She had tribal subjects. Their relationship with the forest was very, very important. They grew wheat, they exported wheat. It was a country that never went hungry. So tell us about these two aspects of a monarch. You know, this thing about the temple, the deity, how important and central it was to everybody, you know. And also this thing about something as crucial as water. We don't realize how important these systems are, you know.
So before I start off answering this question, just want to tell you that you must be wondering why I'm looking like the sun, wearing a yellow sari. I wear it in honor of Rani Durgavati. To this day, if you go to her kingdom, what was her kingdom, the tribal Gonds wear yellow in her honor. They will wear yellow turban, yellow dhoti, and yellow saris on special occasions, including on the 24th of June every year, which is celebrated as Balidan Divas, which is her, her sacrifice day. But coming to Rani Durgavati, she was such an exceptional monarch because she was known as the Tal Talao Rani. She excavated 64 water bodies, 64. And she had lakes named after pretty much anyone, including, her husband, her father-in-law, her son. There was Bal Sagar, which
elephant.
And the elephant, yeah, Hathi Tal. So she had a favorite elephant who was like a son to her, who went to battle with her and died for her. So there was a Tal Talao named after him, Hathi Tal. Then she had Tal Talaos named after the famous people, her critical people in her court, including some of her famous generals. So there were 64 Tal Talaos that she excavated, and the whole point was that she was determined to make sure that no one went thirsty in her kingdom. Now remember, this part of India is not necessarily a very richly rain-fed part. So having a monarch who looks after your water needs is a very, very critical part of the prosperity of that kingdom. So one of the reasons why Garha became became a grain bowl and became rich and all that was because Durgavati herself was totally committed to building tanks and building temples. These were the twin responsibilities of the Rani. There are several temples that are connected with her name. And interestingly, and here I want to make that distinction, I would like to give the examples of two temples. Now, the first is a Sharda Mata Mandir. Sharda Mata Mandir in near Madan Mahal, which used to be one of her palaces in Jabalpur. You can go and see it. It's a beautiful temple. And if you go to that temple is directly associated with Rani Durgavati. She was the one who consecrated that temple. And there is a very interesting ritual that happens in the temple. I don't want to give it away. You can read the book and see what it is. That ritual was started by her. And for the last 460 odd years, every year, people go to that temple to perform that ritual, connected to her name. So you have Sharda Mata Mandir on the one hand. Then on the banks of the Narmada, you have a Shiv temple that she built. Now obviously the current structure, if you go and see it, you'll say that it is fairly modern, must be about it says 60, 70 years old, but this temple was rebuilt several times over the years. So, and of course she being a Chandel Rajput, she was a Chandel Rajput, so her Kula Devi was Manaiya Devi. And there is a Manaiya Devi Mandir also in Kalinjar Fort, although Kalinjar was not her patrimony, but it was, she was a princess of Ratmahova, but they were part of the Chandel line. So what I'm saying is that if you look at what her responsibilities are, and again, there are contemporary references, there is a book that she had commissioned during her reign called Prastab Ratnakar. Now, Prastab Ratnakar talks about her duties, her sacred duties, and we see how much time she spent in consecrating temples, in doing yagyas, in various other, sacred duties that she had, and not just her husband Dalpati, as long as he was alive, her father-in-law Sangram Shah. So they clearly took their duties, these twin duties of the sacred duties and the secular duties. They were equally important, and she took them very seriously.
Incidentally, I am wearing a Maheshwari in honor of Ahilyabai Holkar that I would like to talk about with Vikram later on in the day. This is just to honor two ladies and the two things that we wear. Now with regard to Durgavati, she, let's talk about, I don't want to use the word feminist, but she was a woman. She commanded the respect of her people. She was a widow. Yes. And it's not just Hindus. Yes. So can you just talk about what it must have been in her capacity to actually win the loyalty of no less than Afghans? Yes. And what must have been the strategic mind of this lady in her time to not only, we have such weird notions about a widow in India, and we are so, like I tell my students, one would think if you read British accounts that, every Bengali woman whose husband died had to, jump into a fire. That's the kind of ridiculous, legacy we bear about the widow in India. And yet, Durgavati, can you just, do justice to her in that aspect? I don't want to use the word feminist.
Okay. She was, so first Durgavati in many ways was a very unusual monarch. And we were just talking about Akbar just a couple of minutes back. And today when we look at Akbar, we say he was a very unusual medieval monarch. In the sense that he was tolerant of all religions, and we have his comments about himself that I'm deeply ashamed of what I used to be before. He was by no means the only one, because if we look at Durgavati, we find that there is a very interesting episode where she actually defeats the Afghans in battle, the Miana Afghans. The Miana Afghans used to be in the Elichpur area along the banks of the Son River. So these Miana Afghans, after Islam Shah Suri was the Suris were defeated and the Mughals came back to power. The Miana Afghans went around that area fomenting trouble. They were just, loots, plain and simple looting. What Durgavati did was she defeated them, and defeated them in so definitively that they never ever molested her kingdom again. Not only that, a lot of them went and joined Durgavati. So the interesting thing is we find that there are these Afghan generals like Shams Khan Miana, Mubarak Khan, all these people, and there are a whole lot of them, there are like 6, 7 of them whose names have survived to this day, who all of them lost their lives fighting for her in the final battle. So this shows you that they respected this lady enough. First they are defeated by her, and she earns their respect, and till the end of their days they followed her to battle and gave their lives for her. So clearly for a monarch to include defeated Muslims, generals into her army means that, you know, she had a very clear idea of what tolerance meant. And that is something that was by no means peculiar only to the Mughal court, number one. Number two is that, you know, if we look at the way she has, by the way, there are Tal Talaus also dedicated to some of these Muslim generals, by the way. So the whole point I'm trying to make here is that the monarchs of medieval India, many of them followed a similar routine, most of them. And these people, the Muslim generals who were included into court, both secular and military, were promoted according to their capabilities. There was no religious angle involved in that at all, firstly. When it comes to feminism, the reason why I say that she is an utterly modern medieval queen is because in every decision she takes in her life, she pushes the envelope. Remember, she is a Chandel princess. This is a very iconic Rajput bloodline, right? What does she do? Her father organizes a Swayamvar. She runs away and marries a tribal Gond prince, right? So this is an intercaste marriage. So unusual that there are only 2 examples of intercaste marriages in the entire 400 years of Rajgond history. Only 2. The first is Durgavati, the other one is when dynasty founder Yadurai married a Gond princess called Ratnavali. Only 2 examples. So she goes against tradition, marries the man that she loves, all right? When he dies, she doesn't jump into the sati fire. She says, I will rule. My son will be king, I will be regent. And she fobs off this brother-in-law out of Garha. He skulks in, you know, in another kingdom called Chanda. And he skulks there till she's dead. He never comes back. And then, you know, if we look at, again, we go back to Ramnagar inscription, it is very clear that the kingdom is ruled and the power structure is controlled by the queen. She's not a puppet queen. She's taking all her decisions herself, okay? And right till the very end, you know, when there is a beautiful passage, and again, it's very interesting that Abul Fazl being Akbar's hagiographer, and Akbar is her enemy. So she is Akbar's enemy, therefore Akbar is his master, therefore she needs to be demonized, which he does. He does demonize her. But he treats her with unusual amount of respect. Throughout the account that he gives of her, he keeps talking about her nobility, talks about her valor, talks about the fact that she never backs down. No matter how much the Mughals are bullying her, she is not going to blink. And this earns her respect from somebody like Abul Fazl, who records it in the Akbarnama, right? So even there, right till the very end, she is saying, my dharma comes first. Death before dishonor. I am not going to back down to bullying. I am not going to allow these people to run riot. I will face them in battle. I will take them on. And you know, this is amazing strength. I mean, it gives me goosebumps every time I think about it, because all the men around her really let her down. If she was defeated in the final battle, it was because the men around her let her down.
In fact, that was going to be my next and my last question. I'll leave the audience 10 minutes to ask theirs. You know, when you have this graphic description of the battle, you know, and then it's very disturbing and very disheartening, because as you rightly, I mean, as you said, the first day she was victorious. And she implored her generals to take proactive measures so as to, you know, neutralize the artillery that Asaf Khan had, which she didn't. But then, you know, they don't listen to her. So that's where she's let down. And sure enough, the artillery is there the next morning and puts her at a disadvantage. But, you know, it is the battle scene with the description that hit me so badly, and I've gone on record to say that I've wept reading your book. You know, and you talk about a picture that has been painted that depicts this scene, you know, where she's on her elephant, she's wounded at the moment when the arrow actually strikes her. And you have the sort of the control of the battle sort of disentangles and dismantles around her, and she knows that there's nothing she can do about it. Now, if there is a picture, why is it not in your book?
Thank you for asking this. So there is a picture. There is a very evocative picture in the Akbarnama, which documents this particular moment when the queen has been hit by an arrow, and Abul Fazl describes it also. One arrow at the temple, one at the neck, and she pulls it out, but the arrowhead remains. So she's bleeding profusely. And this picture is right now sitting in the Victoria and Albert Museum as part of the Akbarnama papers in UK. The reason it was not included in this book, despite our best efforts, is because the V&A asked for £300 for it. So first, they steal our stuff, and then they get us to pay to use what was ours to begin with. That's nice, right? It's a nice business plan. But what I would really want is for the government of India to take this up so that whatever of ours is sitting in British museums should at least be allowed to be used by scholars free of cost. So I couldn't pay £300 for this. And I'm really sorry, I couldn't pay, but that picture is there. If you want, please Google it, you'll see the picture. Now this picture is very beautiful because you see it's a tableau. If you see the Akbarnama pictures, they are tableaus. So this picture is a tableau. And Rani Durgavati is right at the bottom left-hand corner of the picture. And we see her wounded, and we see the elephant is also wounded. Sarman, the elephant, is wounded, is very badly wounded, is bleeding. And we see all these Mughal soldiers with their helmets and the curved swords who are swarming the picture. So in this picture, she is not center stage. She is not center stage. She is in a corner. And like what has happened to her in post-independence year, she has become a footnote in her own story. But the good news is, this picture, you see this? This is a almost near contemporary portrait of hers. This picture is hanging in the Chennai Museum. And the lovely, lovely authorities in the Chennai Museum allowed us to use it for free. So if you want to see what she looks like, you can go take a look at her in the Chennai Museum.
So the last point before the audience asks the question is that she fought that last battle, and she was determined to preserve actually her body from dishonor. But you make a very disturbing veiled quote from the other chronicler of Akbar's time. And actually when I read that line, that she'd rather die than be defiled, I immediately said, you never know with this enemy. You know, they can desecrate a dead body. But can you just end with what you think seems to be a veiled reference to precisely that?
So this is the most disturbing part. Okay. This is the most disturbing part of Rani Durgavati's story. She killed herself because when she realized that escape was not an option anymore. There was just no way she could get out. And as a result, she killed herself. The Gonds believe that her elephant also died, but he covered her body with his own, which may well be true. But Mughal chroniclers like Badauni, from their references, it becomes fairly obvious that her body was desecrated. And Gond folk tales and folk songs also mentioned this very clearly, that apna tan bachao ma. You know, so she is looking to protect her feminine form, even in death. So this is how I mean, a great warrior and a woman who really did not do anything at all politically to cross the Mughals. She, unlike the Sisodias, she didn't have a history with them at all. She was just plundered, looted, killed, desecrated, simply because she was a woman and in charge of a rich kingdom. That's it.
Questions? Keep them short and no back and forth.
That was a great session. Thank you so much. So my question is that, earlier in your speech you said we learn more about the wars that we lost. And I seem to find this very systematic narrative in the history that I was taught in school, that, we lost more wars than we won. India never attacked another country, and this continued to be the prime focus of how we learned the freedom struggle as well, where submissive and peace seem to be...
You have to come to your point, please. We don't have the time.
Yeah. So do you think that this was done to change the perception of India to be very defenseless, which has led to our generation being very self-loathing Indians?
Yeah.
And the like?
Absolutely, I totally agree, because I think the whole point of picking and cherry-picking battles from our past only to show how valiantly we fought and lost, sort of reiterates this point that we were never a warrior class, never meant to, win battles. We were just nice people. We even got our independence through, non-violent means, quite forgetting the work that was done by others who have been othered in the narrative. So yes, absolutely right.
Congratulations, Nandini, for a brilliant talk and a brilliant book. I just don't have a question, but I just want to add something to what you said. You talked about intercaste marriages. I want to say marriages were always intercaste, especially among rulers. And I want to give the example of the Satavahana dynasty, which ruled in that area, South India, almost 1,000 years before Rani Durgavati. The Satavahanas were Brahmins, and they married a Shaka princess. Shaka were for Malechas, if you want to call that. And they also married Naga princesses.
Yes.
So, we have to re-look at our past when we talk about these intercaste marriages. They were the norm, not the exception. But congratulations on a brilliant talk.
Thank you, Meenakshi ji, coming from you, that's high praise. And I just want to say the Naga princess, Chandragupta Vikramaditya also had, Kuber Naga was his second wife, who was a Naga princess. There are examples, yes. Lichavi is also, Samudragupta's mother.
One more question?
Yes, we have 1 more minute. Anybody?
Okay. Yeah, there is a question.
Brilliant story, thank you very much. I'm from Sangha, and in Ekatmata Strotra we have a mention of Rani Durgavati. Nevertheless, we didn't know much about her. But my question to you is, now the book is released, how you percolate this message to the younger generations who are constantly fed with the information that is not ours?
I hope that's the reason why I have written this book. I always say I am not a historian. I am a journalist. I am only reporting a story that happened 460 years ago. So I have written this like a journalistic account. It is easy to read, it is pacey, and I just want to make it very easily understandable, relatable, so that young people will be able to read it, enjoy it. Yesterday I was at the Times Lit Fest. I was a bunch of kids, my daughter's age, 15, 16 years old, they walked up and they said, "Ma'am, why don't history books, why are they so boring? Why can't we have stories?" But the word history includes the word story in it. We have to tell them as stories, so kids will enjoy them.
So well done, Nandini. Thank you very much for writing this book. I did not imagine that it would impact me so much, and really, to bring forward a heroine like her, you, in all of our hearts, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay, we will now take a 10-minute bookstall break. Don't miss this opportunity to purchase the books showcased in our stores and get them autographed by the authors. It's the time to interact with the authors.
everybody.
Welcome everybody.
Hello and welcome to Khulke.
Khulke is in